In this video, we will be looking at buttons and what to do when a button is clicked. We will start with an empty project. Our layout is empty. We can drag a button from here to our activity. Now, the first thing you should do after you add a component to your activity is change its ID. The ID is very important. You need to define a meaningful ID name for every component you add. For example, we are going to build an application that when you press the button, it will display Hello World inside a text view. So the ID for this button, I will call it Hello Button. I would also add a text view so that I would display the Hello World text in it after the button is pressed. I would also call this text view Hello Text View. Inside the properties, I will delete the text that is written inside the text view. Now I want the text view and the button to match the width of the screen around it. So inside the layout width, I can change from wrap content to match parent. And that will change the width of my text view. I can do the same thing for the button. Now, if we do the same thing for height, it will go all over the screen. We don't want that. So now we set our layout. Everything else we're going to do is defined inside the Java class. The first thing we do is connecting the objects inside our layout to Java objects. We will start by adding a button object and a text view object to our main activity class. We will give our button and text view meaningful names. Now we can notice here that button has a red color because the library for button is not imported. Now Android Studio makes it easy for us, so if we press Alt Enter, it will give us options and we can press on Import Class and it will import the class. If you expand the import classes, you can see that button was imported. Then we will add an object for the text view. The same thing for the text view class. We press Alt Enter and in this case it automatically imported it for us. We will call our text view Hello Text View. Now inside onCreate, when the activity is first created, we will connect the objects inside the layout to these objects. The reason I said the ID is very important is because we will be using the ID to locate those objects inside the layout. There's a hidden file in Android project called R, and R basically stores every ID and every component in your project. You do not edit R and you do not add to it anything. Everything is automatically defined by Android Studio. Now we will connect all the objects inside onCreate to our objects. What I like to do is define a function called setupUI. Inside this function, I will do all the setup for the UI, which means connecting the components in the layout to my objects in my activity class. And then I just call setupUI inside onCreate. The reason I do that is because when you're having multiple components inside your layout, the list can become long. This just makes the code neat in a way that inside onCreate, if you have more things than just setting up the UI. You can easily see what's happening. So first I will start with the text view. We use a function called findViewById, and we pass to it the ID of our text view. And findViewById will find that text view based on the ID and will return it, and it will be assigned to our hello text view. The way we get the ID is using the R class. We start with r.id, and then we basically get a list of every ID we have. We can type hello and we'll find our hello text view. Now there's a problem here. We need to define what kind of object findViewById is returning. So we will simply just define that it is a text view object. And now findViewById will return a text view object that we have inside our layout. Then we will do the same thing for our hello button. We define it's a button, then findViewById, and we pass the ID of our button. Now to show you a simple example, after I set up the UI, I'm going to change the text of hello text view to hello. I use a function called setText, which is a function of the text view class, and I pass a string hello. If I run this code, I have an emulator already running. We can see we have a problem here with our components. They are on top of each other, the text view and the button. If we go to our layout, although they look fixed here, but the container they are inside doesn't have a relative layout. If we go to the layouts, we can choose a relative layout. We can add it to our activity, and then we can add those components to our relative layout. We also need to change the height and the width of the relative layout. We will match parent so that it will take the shape of the parent. And now, if we change the location of the button and the text view inside a relative layout, their position will be relative to the screen. So if I run this again, we can see that their position is actually now defined and is relative to our screen. And we can also now see that inside the text view, the word hello is written. If I press the button, nothing happens. What I want to achieve here is that when I press the button, I want to type hello world inside the text view. We go back to the main activity class. We will use something called onClickListener. A listener basically listens to a button so that when an action happens to it, it can detect it. An onClickListener detects an onClick action. onClickListener is a class inside the button class. So I will build now an onClickListener. We will call our listener onClickHelloButton. And we will create a new listener. Now there's a function inside the onClickListener that is called onClick. And this function basically is called whenever the button is clicked. Now we can see here we have an error because we haven't implemented onClick yet. Now Android Studio can make things easy for us. We can click here and we can say implement methods, and we choose what methods we want to implement. These are methods we are overriding from the onClickListener class. So now all we want to do is to set the text of the text view to hello world. I will just simply cut this line here and paste it inside onClick. And I will change this to hello world. Now if I run the code, I would expect when I click the button, the onClick listener will listen to the click and will call onClick. And then the text view will be set to hello world. And nothing happens. The reason nothing happens is because we created a new onClick listener, but we haven't connected this listener to our button. So inside setup UI, we can call a function which is set onClick listener to our hello button. And we will pass the name of our listener that we've created, onClick hello button. Now if we run the code again, we press the button and we can see hello world is written inside the text view. So to summarize everything, at the beginning when onCreate is called, we are connecting the objects from the layout to objects inside our activity class. And we are also creating an onClick listener and we are setting it to our button. Inside the listener, inside onClick function, that's called when the button is clicked automatically, we are setting the text of the hello text view to hello world. When we press the button, the listener detects that the button is clicked. It calls onClick and it sets the text of the text view.